Good afternoon. The time is 1:30 p.m. on October 7th, 2021. It is the regularly scheduled Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for the month of October here at the City of West Palm Beach. It's another beautiful day here in Paradise, and welcome you all to today's proceedings. We'll go ahead with the roll call. So I'd ask the Board Secretary to please call the roll.
Christopher Hagan.
Present.
Christopher Kammerer.
Present.
Malika Barlow. Let the record reflect that Malika Barlow is not present. Michael Hyman. Let the record reflect that Michael Hyman is not present. Michael Wood.
Present.
Alfred Fields.
Present.
Jonathan Burgess.
Present.
Thank you. Before we go into the Pledge of Allegiance, just as a matter of record, based on the fact there are a total of 5 members present, that means that both of the alternates will be serving as fully voting members today. But it also requires that, as a reminder, all matters in front of us require a vote of 4 votes in favor for it to be approved. We'll now go to the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the previously held meeting. I believe that we all received that in the packet. Those were the minutes from the July 1st, 2021 meeting. So hopefully you all have had a chance to review that. If so, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second it.
Okay, the motion has been approved or has been recommended for approval and seconded. All in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Now move to a report from our planning division staff. So Mr. John Roach, please take the floor.
Good afternoon. For the record, John Roach, Principal Planner for the city. Don't have a formal presentation, but just a couple of items to discuss. First is at the end of your agenda is the election of officers item. Normally this is held in end of September, or in your September meeting. However, we did not have a meeting there, so that's on the agenda today. So after your last item, you will take that up. Secondly is this past week, you should have received an email from me that contained a survey with regards to the digital packets. What we're looking for is just feedback on your experience in obtaining the digital packet via email, the link, and so forth, accessing the packet. We've been doing it for about 1.5 years with regards to COVID, kind of put us in that situation. We're actually transitioning in the next few months to completely digital submittals and so forth. So we're really trying to push it in that direction. So we'd like to continue this electronic distribution. But as part of that, we'd like to get your feedback on your experience and make sure that it's accessible to you, easy to use, and so forth. Unfortunately, there are some security measures that we have to overcome as part of it. I know those present a little bit of a challenge, but it seems like it's working pretty well based upon what we've seen. If you haven't completed that survey, if you can kind of do that before the end of the week, that would be greatly appreciated. Things we're looking for feedback on, the delivery of the packet, via the email, the link that's provided, accessing that link, and so forth, as well as the use of the packet during the meeting. I believe this is your first meeting. Everybody's having laptops on the dais there in which the packet's provided for you for reference. Additionally, there's a folder open to access the files on the thumb drive, which are the same files that were provided via the link. So anytime there's supplemental materials, for example, large formats of the plans, studies, and what have you that are referenced in the staff report, we usually try and provide those in a supplemental folder for you to look at. So, and then also if there's any training aspect, how to access it through OneDrive, using that link, the passcodes, as well as the PDF within Acrobat. One thing I'd like to explore is potentially showing everyone, if you don't know already how to comment on a PDF, maybe bring that PDF with you. You can open it on the laptop there so you can reference those comments as you're reading through it. Obviously, you could write out comments, at home and bring those in, but we definitely want to make every resource available to you as a board member and volunteer. Lastly is the packet was updated. Each case had a motion page at the end. I've provided an update to that motion page. The update included that if the board chooses to deny an application, we are asking that the person making the motion and seconding the motion identify which standards the application is not complying with, and then identify why it does not comply with that standard. That way it's clearly put into the record, that you're using those variance standards, those special use standards or what have you, and indicating which ones are not in compliance as part of that. So you will see those within the updated packet before you. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you very much. Move on to remarks from the chairperson. Just a couple of housekeeping related items. One is we are still operating in a COVID-19 pandemic environment. So note here, present in the chambers, we are observing physical distancing. Additionally, there is a requirement here at City Hall for face coverings to be worn. The exception is if you are coming up to speak, coming up to the microphone, you may remove your face mask. That can help with clarity, being able to understand the speaker. So if you so choose, you may do that. We just ask that you then, when you're done speaking, return to the seat, put on your face covering again. Additionally, I'll just mention go over the proceedings that are for the matters that are in front of us today. The matters before the Zoning Board of Appeals are quasi-judicial in nature. Anyone who's wishing to speak, including members of the public who wish to offer public comment, will need to be sworn in. The applicant will then make a presentation and they'll answer any questions from the board. The applicant will then be followed by city staff who will provide a presentation and recommendation to the board, and then they will answer any questions. Members of the public will then be given the opportunity to provide public comment. Each person will receive up to 3 minutes to make those comments. City staff will also insert any public comment received in advance of today's meetings, such as emails, voicemails, etc., into the official record. The applicant will then have a chance for rebuttal at the discretion of the chair, and then we will close the floor. The board will go into executive session for discussion, motion, and a vote. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a requirement that 4 votes are required for approval of any matter in front of this board. So that concludes my remarks. I'll now just move into the declarations of ex parte communication. I'll start on my left by Member Burgess.
No ex parte communications.
Okay, thank you. Member or Vice Chair Kammerer.
No ex parte communications.
Okay, we'll go to my right and over to Member Wood
No ex parte communications.
and Member Fields.
No ex parte communications.
And for myself, Chair Hagan, no ex parte communications. So with that, we'll move into the public hearing. I'll start off with the swearing in of the speakers. Please rise and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any continued cases in front of us, so we'll move into the first new case that is on today's agenda, and I'll have our secretary read that case into the record, please.
A request by John Schmidt of Schmidt Nichols on behalf of Southern Boulevard Holdings, LLC, for a variance to the required rear setback for the placement of an outdoor canopy. The approximately 0.86 acre property is located at 330 Southern Boulevard within Commission District Number 5, Commissioner Christina Lambert.
Mr. Chair, I need to recuse myself from the case. I have a business relationship with the property owner.
Okay, thank you. Let the record reflect that Member Burgess is recusing himself from today's item. Because of that, and I'll mention to the applicant, it would require unanimous approval from the 4 members present if you would like to proceed.
Yes, we would like to proceed.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks you, Mr. Chair and members for your consideration today. Just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about from our presentation is the location of the property, really a business overview, a summary of our request, staff solutions, the 10 standards that were judged by, a summary, and then some owner comments, if you would, please. The location is 330 Southern Boulevard between Boulevard between Dixie and Olive. It's 0.86 acres, and it's close to a residential area with Coniston to the north, Malvern to the south, and Nottingham to the south. And that's important as we go through the presentation. If we all turn back time, the expansion of this outdoor canopy was done without a permit. And at the time of the occurrence, the placement of the canopy was, the main focus was providing separation standards and safe distancing locations for customers, as well as restaurant availability to survive from a business standpoint. It was placed in its current location quite simply for the notion of business survival, and I hope you'll understand that. The restaurant's been in this location since 1985, over 36 years. It's not corporately owned, but it's locally owned by the Poltz family. It provides livelihood for Leon Poltz, his wife, and his 2 sons and their full families. It employs another 85 people in the community, and it's a very family-friendly environment, and I think a staple in our community. Our request in the kind of yellow-orange is a rear setback for a length of 44 feet of the canopy that was built. And it was to maintain operational business, provide outdoor seating options, which then provided for additional spacing both indoors and outdoors of the facility. It was to maintain our customer base, which was critical at the time and still continues to be, and to maintain our current parking configuration. It is in alignment with a previously granted variance near this location, just to the east, right here. It's efficient use of our available land, and we have the support of the directly adjacent residential neighbors. We feel that staff's lack of support and looking at the merits of our variance request stems from a proposed parking configuration that just, really doesn't work. The owner is the most familiar with the day-to-day operations and been doing it for 35 years. This use, the restaurant requires 65 parking places, 3 of which then have to be handicapped. The loss of an on-site space in this configuration that they proposed would reduce our capacity. The dead-end spaces are really not conducive to the dead-end situations that are out there that you see along this picture. The dead end along the wall. So they're not the closest spaces to the main entry, which they are required in the solution. The 8-foot compact spaces are not desirable nor used, and if you were to put them there, they're in the direct conflict with our main entrance. Having less parking is going to further compound our parking issue there. If you've ever been by, it's a very busy restaurant. We have approval across the street to put our employees at 333 Southern, as well as the Walgreens. And we feel that a loss of parking just further compounds the issue, and it puts people in the adjacent neighborhoods. Staff also had a concern of lighting. We feel that the canopy is beneficial, that it reduces the light spill onto the adjacent property and actually directs it downward. And smell and noise, there's an existing 6-foot wall, and this has been in operation for 8 months with the direct neighbors that are supporting the use. If there was a noise problem, there hasn't been one, but it would be a code enforcement issue that we would address. I want to go over the 10 standards which were judged by. Staff felt we only met 3 of the 10, and so I want to read through these, so bear with me. Special conditions or circumstances. Special circumstances have come to exist on the land, building, or restaurant use that result from the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past 18 months and into for the foreseeable future, additional personal separation space and distance has become a standard requirement. It is now the expectation of the public and the patrons. The need for additional separation of indoor seating as well as outdoor dining space for our patrons has become necessary for the restaurant business. In an effort to maintain that customer business and not remove parking and keep the business in operation, the applicant has expanded his outdoor dining area. The location of the canopy is in alignment with the previous variance and the rear setback, and utilizes the existing wall in the southern support for the support of the canopy, and is vital to the continuing future success of the restaurant. The special conditions and circumstances that are not the actions of the applicant. As a result of COVID-19, the newly required social distancing have become a requirement of the CDC, the Public Health Department, and expectation of our customers. The pandemic has the need to provide for safe seating separation areas, outdoor seating for the public to reduce risk, and that's in the CDC standards that you'll see later. Special privileges. This canopy is only a small portion of the overall property. The location and configuration of the existing building and its internal functions, as well as external layout, need to be close proximity to the operations of the staff and kitchen. In addition, the site's existing parking, circulation, and handicap locations further limit the available locations for this canopy location and outdoor seating, and the safe operation for the staff, public, is not provide any special privileges or not enjoyed by others in this zoning district. Literal interpretation of the provisions will provide the applicant the right not enjoyed by other commercial properties. The canopy is only a small portion of the overall property. In addition to the site, existing parking, circulation, handicap space and locations further limit the available locations for the canopy and outdoor seating for safer operation for the staff and public. And all commercial properties allow outdoor seating for restaurants. I'm almost done. Minimum request. As stated, the close proximity to the restaurant limits the availability of locations for the canopy at outdoor seating locations. There is an existing 6-foot height concrete wall which separates the restaurant from the neighbors. The neighbors have provided a letter of their support and location. The 44 feet is the minimum request and will not reduce the existing parking count or configuration, and therefore not compound the need for additional variances. We feel this is the minimal possible request. We're in compliance, according to staff, with the comprehensive plan. Public welfare, I hope you'll agree that the canopy actually provides safety for the public welfare. It provides a fresh environment to the public, and we feel it's safe, that want to feel safe when they're dining out. A strong percentage of our guests remain concerned about COVID and the variants of the virus, and we will while we remain encouraged that the pandemic is closer to being controlled, it's entirely possible that the surge of infections could happen again with the virus or another variant. Responsible use, we feel by granting this variance would actually allow reasonable and efficient use of the land, as a separation social distancing requirement has diminished the need for the seating capacity within the building and the further trend to have outdoor seating. The percentage of the public welfare has anxiety about the seating inside, and the canopy reduces the risk and gives the comfort while remaining participants in the public arena. And they feel that we meet the standards of I and J. In summary, the hardship is not caused by the applicant. We have constantly changing CDC requirements, directives, and standards, and daily updates from the health department, their corporate offices, as well as the CDC. And the City of West Palm Beach Code does not allow for a reduction in the parking. This is some CDC info that was taken directly off there today, but to reduce the risk there, and they are asking for additional separations and outdoor seating. We feel, in closing, this is a minimal request. The building permit approval is pending, so if you were to approve this tonight, all our structural standards are all met, so it's the approval for the building permit we've applied for, and it's pending the hearing result today. The canopy length is only 44 feet. Staff's reconfiguration of the parking has a compounding effect on the surrounding neighborhood. The minimal setback distance requirement is a comparative to the previously approved variance, and we have multiple letters of support. I'm going to let the owners speak, and we have 8 letters of support that I'll get to staff and send them up to you. Thank you, and I'll let Mr. Leon Poltz, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman and board members. Thank you. Thank you for volunteering your time here today and for allowing me to speak on my family's and the Flanagans in West Palm Beach behalf. My name is Zach Poltz. This location is somewhat different than the other Flanagans in that it is solely owned by my family. It is not a corporate store or limited partnership. My dad, mom, brother, my wife. We've all worked at that store in various roles. Over those many years, we have dealt with and overcome numerous challenges, but nothing could have prepared us for the last 2 years and the pandemic that overnight changed our store. We went from a fully opened restaurant to having 0 inside seating in the blink of an eye. While several restaurants in our area, including Duffy's, either decided to voluntarily close their doors, leaving their staffs unemployed, or were forced to shutter their business because of the pandemic, we quickly tried to change our business model. Instantly, we became an outside takeout and delivery business. We did not use any outside takeout delivery services, but instead used our own staff to make deliveries to keep as many people employed as possible. Over the coming months, it felt like each day presented new obstacles to overcome as our staff dealt with the risk of COVID and we maneuvered our way through the many directives from state, county, and city officials. During that time, the restaurant was losing money, even after reducing as many costs as possible. Those months of uncertainty were a very scary period for our family and for our staff's families. It was very difficult to watch my dad worry day and night that the business he had put so much work into from the time my brother and I were kids and through the following decades was now struggling to make ends meet. There was no guarantee that it would work out in the end. This was not a self-inflicted wound. We had not lowered our quality for our food. We had not stopped emphasizing guest service. The risk of losing our livelihoods and those of our staff was brought on by an event that no one predicted. Still, we continued forward, going all in, to do everything we could to keep the business going. My brother and I would send out emails to the neighborhoods we live in and drop off food at the end of our shifts for extra sales. When outside seating was allowed, we quickly put up temporary tents to accommodate our guests and get more staff back to work. These tents were tied down to weights and provided shade, but were proved to be unsafe in high winds. A storm made quick use of the metal framework, tossing it in the air and twisting it into a metal knot. Fortunately, this rainstorm occurred overnight and no one was hurt, but we learned that pop-up tents was not a realistic solution. As inside seating was slowly allowed in various stages, we did everything we could to ensure the safety of both our guests and our staffs. We eliminated tables to allow proper spacing. Hand sanitizer was installed throughout the restaurant. All of the staff wore gloves. We relocated our hostess area outside. Everyone wore masks, and we even employed someone to open and close the front door as guests visit. We put safety as a top priority. Even so, we still had guests who chose not to return to inside seating. It became evident that even with all the safety measures in place, a large portion of our clientele were not comfortable returning to restaurants where they were seated inside. It was in that mindset of survival that the idea of adding a more secure outside area was determined as the best way to accommodate those guests that had hesitations about dining indoors, and a secure awning was placed in an area that was otherwise not being used. I apologize that we did not consult the city. At the time, we had become accustomed to having to quickly decide on a course of action and move forward. The outside area quickly became a location that was used by guests for many reasons. Several regulars returned, as well as new guests who wanted to be outside. Earlier this week, I spoke with a family visiting from out of town. The regulations in their state are more stringent about indoor seating, and they felt much more comfortable dining in the open air. While there is a large portion of the population that seems unconcerned about COVID, there's a segment of our residents and visitors that have apprehensions. Those with small children who don't have an opportunity to receive a vaccine, guests with underlying health conditions who feel more at risk if complications were to arise from contact with the virus, and sometimes overlooked are those guests who have taken the virus very seriously and perhaps received a vaccine, but still feel more comfortable in an area where they feel the risk is lower. Everyone we speak with has a different level of concern, and we strive to do our best to make them all feel like our restaurant is a place they can visit and enjoy their time without worry. My understanding is that staff would like us to relocate the awning. As you may be aware, the cost of doing business is rising, and in almost no place is it more challenging than a restaurant. We believe in investing in our staffs and have adjusted our pay rates to stay competitive in the marketplace. But rising costs in food, supplies, and insurance, among others, make large expenditures more challenging. We do our best not to raise prices unless absolutely necessary. We have several items on our menu that we currently lose money on. And I know your job is not to make sure we are profitable or not, but I think it is worthwhile to consider what moving the awning would mean for a small business, its staff, and for its guests. The more pertinent argument for you to consider for not moving the awning may be our parking. Relocating the awning would cause us to also relocate our handicap parking and possibly eliminate some parking spaces. As word of a possible move of the awning has spread, we have received comments from those that are handicap parking to make sure that we do everything we can to keep it where it is located. They comment not only that they appreciate that it is right next to the entrance and outside seating area, but also that it is an area of the parking lot that is easy to navigate while in their vehicles. Additionally, removing parking spots has an impact on our residential neighbors. Removing even a small number of spots may not seem like much, but if those cars now park on side streets during our lunch, happy hour, dinner, and sometimes late night rushes, that is a decent amount of added traffic in those areas. Parking on the side streets can also be a safety issue. As you may have heard in the news, last week a person was stabbed at the gas station on the corner of Southern Boulevard and Dixie. We would much prefer our guests park on our property, where we have had FPL add brighter lighting, and we have hired a security person for the evening and night hours. If your significant other or daughter or son was meeting friends at our restaurant during a busy night, would you prefer them to park on our property or walk from a side street? I think the answer is pretty obvious. We have reviewed staff's proposed parking configuration, but we find it unrealistic for several reasons. Moving the handicap parking further away from the entrance and the building doesn't make sense. I find it ironic that we're approved for a setback variance to add handicap facilities in our bathroom, and are now in a situation where we may be forced to move parking for those guests further from the restaurant and make it more difficult for them to drive into. Currently, our handicap parking has excess room. It allows for easy drive-in and back out. The handicap guests we spoke with this week were adamant about the ease of the parking at our location. The difficulty for a handicapped person to drive and park in the proposed handicap area is increased. Those spaces next to the wall are possibly the most difficult to navigate when entering and leaving. To gain parking spaces, the staff proposes adding 3 compact spaces directly in front of the hostess area. Adding the 3 smaller spaces right in front of this area is dangerous and could be prone to accidents for several reasons. The volume of guests using handicapped spaces is much less than non-handicapped spaces. The definite increase in traffic right in front of the restaurant, where our guests enter and exit the building and sometimes wait to be seated, is unsafe. Flanagan's is a family restaurant. Anything that adds to traffic right next to where children may be standing and often playing while waiting for a table is irresponsible. Also, I'm sure that guests looking for parking spaces in vehicles that are not compact will attempt to park in the smaller spaces, which could leave their vehicles extending into perhaps the most trafficked area of the parking lot. The current handicapped spaces are used less frequently, and the drivers tend to be more deliberate and cautious in their driving habits. Lastly, the awning in its current placement is an efficient use of the land. The area of the property cannot be used for parking. If this variance is denied, it is difficult to tell at this point if we would move forward with the redesign for many of the reasons discussed: safety issues, cost, etc. But if we do, what happens to the area where the awning currently is? While answering this, I would also like to address the concerns that were mentioned in the staff report about noise, lighting, and smell. It is likely, with cars parking right next to the hostess stand, that the space where the awning currently sits would become a de facto uncovered waiting area during lunch, dinner, and late night peaks of business. I would argue that the current setup would have less impact on surrounding areas with regards to noise, lighting, and smell. A waiting crowd of people meeting friends, having cocktails while waiting for a table, kids playing, etc., is often louder than individual tables that have been seated in that area, especially without an awning to help contain voices. I think it's important to note that we do not have live music or TVs located in the outside patio area, and it is not uncommon for a guest to ask to sit outside because they find the atmosphere peaceful. Lighting was also mentioned as a concern. There is actually less bleeding of light from our property in that area with the awning than without it. The awning contains the lighting and blocks residual lighting from the building. Lastly, smell was cited. Without an awning, smells such as smoke from waiting guests are free to travel wherever the wind takes them. With the awning structure, fans can be positioned to make sure smells are not a problem. While the staff has pointed out these concerns, it is important to mention that we have received support for the awning both from neighboring property owners and tenants. It's good business for us to be good neighbors. Lastly, staff points out that we relied heavily on the pandemic in the reasoning for our awning. Let me take the time to say this. Yes, of course the pandemic played the most vital role in almost all of the business decisions we've made in the last year and a half. We almost lost our business because of COVID-19. All of our employees almost lost their jobs because of COVID-19. We continue today dealing with the Delta variant and the risk of other variants. Can anyone in the room today say with certainty that we are not going to have another surge in cases in the fall or next year? Do we know if future governing bodies will reduce inside seating again? I respectfully ask that you consider all of these circumstances: an uncertain future, the sampling of voices from our handicapped clientele, the increased traffic safety risk of the proposed redesign, the concerns from our neighboring residential areas with regards to traffic, the fact that since the awning's existence it has been well received and supported by our neighbors, and the desire from our guests for a safe area to dine with friends and family and be part of the community. We respectfully ask that you please support our request for this minimal variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that conclude the applicant's presentation, or? Leon, did you want to speak? Just real quick. Yeah, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and members of the board. Appreciate it. Mine will be a little more brief, but it underlines the importance of what we've done and why we did it. And the current configuration is far and away the most efficient and thought-out plan that we could come up with at the time. It just made sense. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. The beginning of last year was dealing with panic and chaos every single day. As it was mentioned, the idea for the awning was started to keep guests safe and to help implement the ever-changing rules and regulations. There were daily changes to comply with from Washington, Tallahassee, Palm Beach County, West Palm Beach, and our corporate office in Fort Lauderdale, and they all did not always agree. There were mandates that required adding additional staff to be door openers, separate bussers, separate food runners, separate bathroom attendants, masks, gloves, sanitation stations, no indoor seating, partial indoor seating, changing hours of operation, and on and on and on. We were inspected by multiple agencies multiple times. Every single time we were complimented on our procedures for keeping our guests safe. We were concerned about the very survival of our restaurant. We looked at the possibility of closing, which made a lot of sense financially for the duration. Restaurants such as all of the Duffys, all of Rodney Mayo's restaurants, and many others chose to close, but we are responsible for many, many employees and their families, and we take that very seriously. We are still dealing with it. It does not seem that we are even close to being out of the woods yet with new variants and ever-changing new government mandates that still don't always agree. Just this week, there was a mandate from the government that was issued and then retracted minutes later. This awning is a significant investment for us. We were trying to get the awning up as quickly as possible and remove the temporary tents that were a safety hazard. The location lined up with the rest of the building, so it looked good and would have the least impact on parking. Again, we were very concerned about the very survival of the restaurant. I've been with Flanagan's for over 50 years. It's a long time. I started as a salesperson in Big Daddy's and eventually bought the franchise after a mortgage on our house that my wife was not very happy with and loans from family and friends. I converted the bar to a Legends restaurant and changed it to a Flanagan's a few years later. My wife worked with me in the restaurant for many years. My sons have worked with me since they were 14 or 15 years old. This location is not corporate owned, as was mentioned. This is the only Flanagan's franchise that is not owned by someone whose last name is Flanagan. We live or die financially on our own. My family and our great staff very respectfully ask that this variance be granted. Thank you.
State your name for the record, please. Sir?
I'm sorry, Leon Poltz.
Thank you.
Sorry, okay.
Mr. Chair, just have 2 testimonials and we'll be done, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Victor Lato. I live at 1556 Collecting Canal Road, Loxahatchee, Florida. I lived here all my life. I support the variance, especially with my handicap. With a tight parking lot, I can park my truck right next to the front door the way you have it now. And I need outside seating because I am a high-risk diabetic with I can get the COVID, and I have a wound on my foot. And I hope you let us keep the variance.
Hi, I'm Mary McIntyre. I live at 19800 Sandpoint Bay Drive in Jupiter, Florida, and I'm currently outside at the covered patio at Flanagan's on Southern Boulevard, and I want to let you know that I totally support the variance to let them continue to keep this patio covered because I and my family feel safe in sitting outside. Thank you, and I hope you consider the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes our presentation. We're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'll open it up for questions from members of the board, for any person from the applicant's team. I'll start off on my right with Mr. Fields.
Good afternoon. Question I have is along the lines of, is the intent to leave it there permanently, or is the intent to get past all of the recommendations of CDC, the city, the county? Once they've lifted all of the regulations, is the intent then to remove this awning or to leave it permanently?
Sir, it's the intent is to leave it there permanently. We do meet the part. It is an expansion of our outdoor seating, and we have enough parking to address that because the code requires you count not only indoor seating but outdoor space as part of the 1 to 100. So, if we would get this variance, the intent is to leave it there permanently.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant or no? Okay. I'll go to Mr. Wood.
When the canopy was constructed, does it meet all the hurricane codes?
Right now, we've addressed it. Obviously, it was put up, as we mentioned. It was engineered. We've submitted for building permits. We've addressed all the building permits, and the only one we haven't been able to address is the setback. So those are pending approval today.
So what you're saying to me is that it meets the fire department requirements and it meets the hurricane code?
Correct.
The current hurricane
Correct, sir.
code?
Correct.
And the property adjacent to it are on the other side of that wall,
Yes, sir.
concrete wall, that's residential?
That's correct. And that's one of the letters that you have
That's
support.
one of the letters of support?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Kammerer.
Sure, thank you. Member Fields asked you if it was your intent to maintain its permanent. What if the
Use your microphone, Mr. Kammerer.
temporary variance?
Microphone.
Sorry about that. Member Fields had asked you previously whether your intent was to maintain this as a permanent structure. Did you have any discussions with the staff as to having a temporary variance pending a future event when the reasons for creating the structure no longer exist?
We did not have a conversation with staff. The only application that I'm aware of that would allow something like that is a special use, and it has limitations on the timeframes. I'll have to let staff let you know if there's any other one, but we did not have that conversation, but that's the only other possible way that I'm aware of to allow it, but it had time constraints, and I don't know how long we're going to be doing this.
Nobody does. I just wondered if that had been
Yes, sir.
discussed. Because obviously the reason, it seems to me, that the reason for this canopy is to deal with the COVID pandemic. And I'm assuming at some point, we're going to be dealing with this at a lesser stage than we've been the last year or so. So it seems that accommodations that we're making now, we may not have to make in the future. That would be one thing. I think the other thing, if you could explain a little bit better, is the restaurant received a variance for its building previously, as I understand. And so there is a concrete wall that runs the entirety of the property
Correct.
from along the south side, correct?
Yes.
All right, and the building is built, the restaurant physical structure is built right up against that wall, is that correct?
No, it's, I'll see if I can zoom in here a little bit for you to, okay, let's see if I can do this. This may work. So the thin double line is actually that you see here. That's the wall location, which is 3 feet off the property line. The building is actually 4.
Okay, so
The back wall
I
of
see.
the back wall of that. We utilized the wall as one of our supports for our southern support system. So the seating is really kind of in alignment with that 4 feet.
Okay, so on this, as you're showing on this diagram, so there's a 1 foot distance between the concrete wall and the building
Yes,
along the rest of the,
correct.
all right.
And I can maybe try to get out to this picture over here. It's not really letting me. Let's see if I can get you a picture of this. Well, I don't know why it's not letting me do the slides here, but
Looks like slide number 5.
there we go. There we go. So in this picture, you can see the location of the wall, which is 3 feet off the property line. We use that as the supports, and then additional concrete piles were placed to take care of wind loads.
Okay. And if just using that picture for me, if the board were to deny the application and say you made a decision to adopt what these staff had recommended, can you just show on that picture where the end of the, sort of the south side of the canopy would have to be placed?
Approximately just past the sonotube here. So
Okay.
it would go this way to over here.
So that would be 15 feet then from where the
That's correct.
okay.
That's correct. You can see our placement right now, we're 3 feet off of the wall, and then the canopy is 12 feet. So the end of that tube, which is this, is really at the 15-foot mark.
Okay.
If we were commercial to commercial, we would only be a 5-foot setback, but the residential is what's requiring that 15-foot setback. Now, if I could, in staff's solution, we would lose a parking place. And the reason for that is we required 3 handicap spaces. We feel that the solution, puts the handicap down here along the wall, which is really difficult, to maneuver around. We felt that the location of these compact spaces, which would be more frequented, would be up right at our main entrance into here. And then we feel also that, a lot of people just ignore the compact. You can go in the garage here when you came in, probably today, a lot of people ignore the compact parking spaces. So somebody's going to try to shoehorn their way in there and then cause even more problems. And lastly, if we were to move it here, then that's a seating area, and then this area becomes the de facto waiting area. So we felt that their solution, we appreciate it and had worked with them, just compounded the stuff that was going on out there. It put more noise adjacent to the neighbors. The reconfiguration of the parking didn't work, and we lost another parking place, which is 100 square feet of dining area that we desperately need because we've increased our seating separations, which have diminished our capacity.
Okay, you mentioned like the waiting area, because if you go back to that picture that you're explaining, there's a white tent there as well. Is that the waiting area currently?
Yes.
Okay. So that would have to be eliminated?
Is that right? What is it?
No, it's not. That's a picture from a while ago where that was a.
You have to
that's
stand
it.
up here.
Sorry.
You have to stand.
I believe that picture was taken many months ago. That white where you see part of that pop up, that's been eliminated. We've decided that's unsafe. That was what we had when we were doing the carryout right there. So that's eliminated, and that's part of the walk up with. Right next to there would be where the handicap would go. There's a ramp that comes up along the building.
Okay.
Correct.
If If I may, just a moment, to address, would it be permanent, or that was our intention? That was not our intention. Our intention was to get something up that was safe to deal with COVID. Obviously, the expense is significant enough that we would like to keep it. I mean, major expense, but it was done COVID, keep the restaurant operational, keep our staff employed, and provide a safe place for our guests. And like I say, just because of the significance of the investment,
Understood.
we'd like to
Okay.
keep it, obviously.
Mr. Chairman, I
And-
have an additional question.
Sorry. And just to speak to that, part of it is the uncertainty that I spoke of. You know, what's around the corner? What could happen next? You know, and previously I would say, oh, you're dreaming. Oh, there's going to be another pandemic. There's going to be, but I can't sit here and say I don't know the answer to that. That what we went through in 2020 could happen again and get worse from what it's doing right now. So that's part of the concern as well.
Let me ask you, if the board were to deny the petition, what would Flanagan's do?
If they were to deny that would be where we'd have to make that decision about if we were able to move forward with, again, for the reasons of the proposed design, which, you know, whether we'd move forward with that because of cost and the safety issues, I don't have an answer to that right now. You know, I guess it's either that, or obviously then we'd have to take it down and we would not have seating for those guests that want to sit outside and have a safe spot to be. You know, I guess we're sort of in between those two things.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, Member Wood asked the questions that I was planning to ask. I did have just one other question for the agent. Obviously, staff has recommended denial, but they have included as a contingency if the board were to approve. There were 3 recommended conditions of approval that the staff has recommended if we were to approve. I was wondering if you had a chance to review those conditions, or
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to talk about those with the client. Maybe we can move on to their presentation and follow back up with you. Could I
okay,
do
sure,
that?
that'd be great.
Thank you. I appreciate
Mr. Chairman, I have one more further question.
Okay, yes, Member. Member Wood.
Can you pull back up on the screen the, okay, so with the city's recommendation as to where the canopy goes, then where actually is the entrance to the restaurant?
The entrance to the restaurant is approximately right here. Is it here?
Excuse me.
Right here, right here.
Right there.
Right there. So how do you get to it?
Right under the, I guess, underneath the canopy here.
Well, what if if you're parked in one of the one of the 5 spaces or one of the 2 handicap spaces that are on the far, the closest to the retaining wall?
Over here?
Yeah.
Well, this is staff solution. I'm not sure. That's.
I know, I'm just asking you then, in practical.
In practicality, they walk between cars and come up into these spaces.
Right, but then you have to walk through a dining area in order to get to the
Yes.
entrance? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
sir. Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, that answers my question.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll then move on to staff's presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Linda Louis, Senior Planner for the record. So as noted in staff's report, staff's position of the variance request is a recommendation of denial. But before I get into the details, I wanted to start off by showing a couple short video clips of the existing canopy that is considered for this variance request. So this first video clip is of the outdoor canopy looking south. This is the location of the canopy, which is providing shading for the outdoor seating area. The canopy is secured to the wall, which separates the seating area from the abutting residences or residential lots to the south. So this next video clip here shows the canopy from a different angle and its proximity to the existing residential lots. Panning north, this is staff's recommended area for the canopy relocation, panning north all the way to Southern Boulevard. So just a quick summary of the variance request. The zoning and land development regulations requires a minimum rear setback of 15 feet for the canopy, as it also abuts a residential zoning district, and that's required. It is a greater setback. The applicant is providing a 3-foot setback, thereby requesting a 12-foot variance, or 80% of the required rear setback. To illustrate the proximity of that canopy in relationship to the abutting residences to the south, the red box indicates the subject property. The purple circle indicates the location of the canopy, and then you have the abutting residential lots to the immediate south. Okay, so I just wanted to spend some time discussing the existing plan versus the proposed canopy layout. So the current canopy layout as presented by the applicant does not meet the rear setback requirement, and that's why they're coming in for the variance. As you can also see, as noted by the applicant, they do have a couple of handicap parking spaces immediately north of this existing canopy. It could be better designed. Right now you have a significant back out area, a pretty lengthy back out area of I'd say approximately 15 feet into the main drive aisle. To eliminate this lengthy back out, staff proposes eliminating the dead space north of the canopy to utilize the space better. And although support letters have been provided by the applicant, staff also has to consider the direct impacts of the outdoor canopy and seating, not just to the existing abutting residences, but also to potential future residences that may come into the area. So the image to the right illustrates staff's proposed layout. So it's important to know that as part of staff's analysis of any variance requests, we have to determine if alternatives can be achieved that would eliminate the requirement for the variance. So the purpose of this exercise was to determine if the canopy could be relocated, whether the canopy is bigger, smaller, or reconfigured differently to provide additional outdoor seating for the restaurant. So under this configuration, which staff believes works, meets the rear setback requirement, there's really no net loss of parking on site. We have a greater distance separation from the abutting and dissimilar residential uses to the south. There's also potential to provide additional site improvements with the landscaping along the south buffer here. And it also eliminates the dead space for a more efficient use of space on site. So just to summarize staff's analysis and findings, it's really important to know that staff does have sympathy and understands the hardship of the pandemic on businesses. The city did have a program in the past that allowed for restaurant businesses to have outdoor seating without meeting the minimum requirements or parking requirements. However, that program had expired as the indoor seating capacity requirements have been eliminated. So the existing canopy that's subject to the variance request was installed without permits, and this is a fact that staff has to consider. Had the applicant come in with the required permits and discuss the alternatives and possible relocation of the canopy, It might have been resolved prior to issuing the permit and the installation. So also as shown on the previous slide, staff believes that the alternative location for the canopy and meeting the required setbacks can be met. There are no peculiarities with the site that would prevent the relocation or configuration of the canopy to address the setback requirements. So staff also has to consider why there's a setback requirement in the first place, a greater setback between dissimilar uses, and that's to provide greater distance separation for more compatibility. The applicant had also noted that the canopy lines up with a building variance that had been previously approved by city staff. This variance was granted in order to meet federal ADA requirements, and as noted in the staff report, this expansion was for restrooms as well as back of house, and that variance was granted because it was able to demonstrate a hardship, and that was ZBA Final Order 2996, which is included in the staff report. So finally, staff has to also consider the direct impacts of the variance on adjacent and abutting property owners, whether they be existing or future property owners or tenants. And the bottom line is that outdoor seating has greater impacts to the surrounding area as opposed to indoor seating. So in terms of analyzing staff's, or the variance standard, staff believes that the variance request has only met 3 out of the 10 requirements or the variance standards, and therefore staff is recommending denial of ZBA case number 3396. To conclude staff's presentation, so in addition to the letters of support that had been provided in the staff report, as well as the supplemental packet, there has been some public comment that staff has received, which hope will read in for the record, and staff also has a couple voice messages that we will need to play for the record. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. We'll now go to questions from the board for staff, and those additional public testimonies will then be heard after this
Correct.
during the public comment period. So I'll start off with Member Wood this time.
I don't have any questions of the staff.
Okay. Vice Chair Kammerer, questions of staff?
Sure. Can you tell me what is it possible to, well, let me just state this. I noticed in one of our next coming up cases, there's a recommendation with regards to the approval of a variance that if certain conditions happen, this has to do with Churchill Road, then it becomes a null and void. Is there the possibility of doing something similar here, where it seems to me that the reason for this canopy being created in the first place is a COVID pandemic? Is there some way of linking the variance on either a temporary basis or until the condition no longer exists?
I'm gonna let the attorney provide some feedback on that.
Sure.
Yes, sir, board members. Your first question is whether the application meets all of the standards for granting the variance. Whether it's temporary or permanent isn't really the controlling factor. It has to meet all of the standards for granting. If it does, it's entitled to approval. If it doesn't, then the code would require that it be denied, and that's without regards to the duration of its use.
Is it possible, though, for an applicant to receive a temporary variance?
If it meets the standards of the code, you then can impose any conditions you find to be appropriate, but it must first meet all of the standards for approval.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Right.
Thank you. So it seems to me as well that there's already an existing variance where you have the restaurant building 1 foot away from this concrete wall. Mm-hmm. So it has a 4-foot setback. I could understand perhaps if there was no prior variance and the entire building was 15 feet away, but it seems here there's already been a prior variance given with Now there's only a 4-foot setback. So what is the difference from the city's point of view now with regards to a 3-foot, the 3-foot
Well, when we
variance?
look at it, I mean, this is a building expansion, so everything is contained indoors. We're talking about a canopy and outdoor seating where the impacts are different. I mean, the impacts are less contained, so you would have noise, lighting, and so forth that are more exposed to the environment as opposed to something that is contained indoors.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm good, thanks.
I'll go to Member Fields.
Can you give me a little bit more information about the expiration of the ordinance or the temporary allowance of outdoor seating and how that stacks with now that it's expired?
Well, from what I know, this was implemented when the pandemic began. Staff or city staff understood that, a lot of restaurant businesses were struggling. So in order to give them some relief, there was a temporary outdoor seating approval, which required a business owner, a restaurant business owner, to come in, apply for this temporary seating arrangement outdoors, and it would exclude them from meeting the parking requirements. And again, this has expired since because there are no longer indoor seating restrictions.
Thank you.
My only question for staff was kind of piggybacking on the question about the setbacks. The code requirement for setbacks is the same, though, for an awning or a building, correct?
Correct.
We don't say, oh, a building can have a 5. In this case, we're commercial abutting residential, so I know the point was also brought up that if this were commercial
if it
abutting
were-
commercial, it'd be different, but
Yes.
but the setback for a building is 15 feet, and the setback for an awning is 15 feet, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's a structural canopy, so the setbacks would be treated same.
Okay. So, and I guess, yeah, where I was going with that is the thought that, well, the impacts, what was stated was the impacts are different because that's open air versus building, and yet we have the same setback requirement. It's not different for the
Right.
two. Okay, yeah, no other questions for staff. So we'll now move into, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. I'll first start off with, it sounds like we had some written and or video or voicemail communication that was received.
All right, our first public comment comes from Samantha Reed, 430 Florida Mango Road, West Palm Beach. She's in support of the project. My family and I like the outside seating at Flanagan's because it's more open space and COVID safe. Second one is Shelby Fletcher, 325 Malvern Road, Sarasota. They're in support of the project. The covered patio on the Flanagan's property has not caused any problems for my roommate and I. We live almost directly next to their outside area. Please allow them to keep the patio area where it is currently located. We worry if it is moved and the number of parking spaces on their property shrinks, that could lead to more people parking on Malvern who are not residents. Victoria Villa, in support of the project. I already have a difficult time finding parking whenever I visit my partner who lives on Malvern. I worry more Flanagan's patrons will park on that road if the awning is moved onto the main parking lot. She's at 623 Park Place, West Palm Beach. Madison Craig supports the project, 2171 10th Avenue North, Lake Worth. I feel safer knowing my family and I can sit outside. Emily Scruggs supports the project, 329 Malvern Road, West Palm Beach. I am not someone who visits Flanagan's often, however, I do live directly behind the West Palm Beach location. Flanagan's has always been a great neighbor and business to live behind. My concern has been the significant traffic and parking problems on Malvern Road and adjacent streets. If parking spaces are reduced at Flanagan's due to the business having no move, their current patio area, I feel that it will cause additional congestion on my street. My neighbors and I hope you consider the impact on the residents nearby and seriously consider the impact it will have on Flanagan's business. Ronald Martini, 104 Lake Pine Circle, Greenacre, in support of the project. The canopy where it is placed provides great outdoor seating and I feel safe. My wife is also handicapped and enjoys parking in the close spots. Please let this family-run business keep the canopy where it is. Diana Martini, same address. My husband and I enjoy going to Flanagan's and eating in the outside area. I have hearing issues and it is easier to have a conversation with friends without all the noises inside. Usually the weather is very nice outside in Florida. Jared Helta, 1530 Grantham Drive, Wellington, supports the project. My family and friends strongly support and prefer outside dining at Flanagan's. We feel it is safer, more comfortable, and enjoy being outdoors. If removed, we would choose other dining options. Deborah Neal supports the project. 4614 Gulfstream Road, Lake Worth. I'm currently receiving treatment for metastatic myeloma cancer. During this, I have lost my right ear. My health is in a state that is getting out is good for my mental health, but I need to be in open air situation. With the radiation and immunotherapy, I have to be very careful with the sun. Flanagan's is one of the few places I like to go. It has a wonderful menu with a variety of foods. Having a place outside that I can go to is imperative. Inside restaurants are also very loud. Only having one ear makes having conversations in crowded restaurants difficult for my disability. I know many senior citizens who also struggle with the ability to hear that do not have my extreme issue. A quieter space outside is a great option for people my age. It is quite discriminatory to take away what is there and obviously being used and therefore needed again. I implore you, allow Flanagan's to keep their outside seating. James Gordon, in support of the project, 501 Roseland Drive, West Palm Beach. I am fully in support of retaining the covered outside seating area at Flanagan's Restaurant on Southern Boulevard. We have a lunch group consisting of men, mostly older than 75, who will not sit inside because of the current pandemic situation. Minus the availability of outside seating, we would not patronize Flanagan's. The setback requirements that have given a reason by staff for rejection doesn't hold water, as it would be interesting to note that Howley's Restaurant on South Dixie has the identical situation with a covered awning adjacent to a property line and has for years. I would think with the precedent established in that instance, there would be a little reason or argument by the city to refuse Flanagan's its request for a variance to do the same thing. And finally, we have an email from Carol Hansen, 436 North Country Club, Atlantis. My husband, Chris, and I are 81 years old and have been both vaccinated and have been enjoying our dinners at Flanagan's outside covered tables. We have enjoyed our food for years and are thankful they have made it possible for us to get safely out of the house again. There are many local restaurants with outdoor seating, but the only one we go to is Flanagan's on Southern Boulevard because of the great food. The situation won't last forever, but we implore you to allow us and our friends to continue our long-standing dates outdoors undercover at our favorite restaurant. That is the end of public comment.
I also have a couple voicemail clips. This is the first one.
Yes, my name is Reynaldo Ponce, resident at 333 Coniston. Case number to appeal 3396. I am against the canopy the Flanagan is looking to be built. I think it's going to be a way too noisy here in the area, which is already is, thanks to Flanagan's. Well, those are my comments. And again, I'm Reynaldo Ponce, resident at 333 Coniston Road. Thank you.
And this is the second voicemail clip.
Hello, I'm calling about the Flanagan situation on Southern Boulevard. And I will tell you the case number in 1 second, sorry. The case number is 3396. I'm calling for the Colemans on Coniston Road. As far as Flanagan's, I think I should tell you that I understand they're already going to have more tables inside because they're going to expand into what is now the liquor store. So that will be more customers and more staff. Now we understand they want to have more outdoor tables, which will be more staff and more customers. I want to tell you that now, I'm not sure what Flanagan's has told you, but they tell everyone to park on Coniston, which they are doing because they're starting to complain to us. What are you doing parking on the street when I can see you have a driveway? We park here and Flanagan's tells us to park here. Also, as far as the 7-Eleven, there should be no exit onto Olive because they can see from 7-Eleven that Southern is backed up more and more so around the clock. Even if there is no left turn from the new huge 7-Eleven, they will be whipping around the corner to race down Coniston to go north on Dixie. I have here my 89-year-old mother has had heart surgery, plus now just recently a pacemaker. And there are two other households within a block of here that also have been having visits of the ambulance. What's going to happen eventually if Flanagan's gets bigger and bigger and bigger, we literally won't be able to get out of our driveway, and I won't be able to get to the hospital. It's getting to be already such a bad situation. On top of which, I just wanted to mention, and thank you for allowing us to leave these messages. When Flanagan's closes at 2:30 in the morning or 2:30 to 3, they all leave there. It's very loud. They congregate outside. A couple of them have extremely loud cars that they love to really rev to have everyone wake everyone up. It's just turning into like we're being part of Flanagan's. I don't know where the staff and the customers are going to park, but if they're going to move into the Big Daddies, even if they're getting parking over at Marathon, there's too many of them here, and they tell them to park on Coniston. So it's really getting to be quite a situation here, and I just don't think, it's one thing with the Big Daddies. Now they're going to have more outside tables. I think it's too much. And the situation with the 7-Eleven, we were told that there would be no exit onto Coniston.
That concludes the voicemail clips.
Okay. So I'll now ask if there are any members of the public. Turn on my mic first. I'll ask if there are any members of the public who are here in the chambers who wish to make a comment on this application. Okay. If not, that concludes the public comment, and that portion is closed. I think I did want to hear back from the applicant if they have an answer on the question that I asked, and then I think there were one or two items from public comment that I may ask you to comment on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. John Schmidt, agent for the applicant. We did read the conditions. We are amenable to those conditions. I'm sorry, they were at the end of the report, and it looked like it was in the support area, so we didn't see those, but we are in agreement with those. In terms of a couple of the comments, I think it's by staff, we feel that the further separation, the 15 feet for sound, is actually contained by the existing 6-foot wall as well as the canopy. So we think it does a better job of that, and I don't think the additional 12 feet would make much of a difference in that situation. In terms of some of the neighborhood comments and the parking, that's what we've been saying the whole time as well, that we, in the staff's reconfiguration, it's a loss of parking. That loss of parking further puts them out into the neighborhood. And I can have Mr. Poltz up here testify if you'd like me to, but I can tell you that we don't tell people to go park on Coniston Road. We do have an agreement with the neighbor at 333, the office building, as well as to park cars there, as well as at Walgreens to park employees there. So we're doing everything we can. It's a popular spot. We're proud of that, and we hope you can support it. I don't know if you can take a straw poll of the support. If there's not support there, we could certainly discuss, the limitations that the vice chair came up with. But I'm here to try to answer those questions and move the project along. Thank you.
One other question that arose from public comment was, and I think it was the last voicemail kept making references to the Big Daddy's Liquors that is attached to the building. Has there been any reconfiguration of that space, or?
No, I'm sorry, you're right. There hasn't been a reconfiguration of that space. It's still Big Daddy Liquors there. It's, I think 500 or 600 square feet of retail. And in fact, our seating has went down. We've had to remove several tables in the main dining area. If you've ever been in there, there's more separation in the main dining, which were kind of freestanding tables. We've also taken stuff out of the high top area. So our seating capacity inside the building has gone down. This has equalized our seating outdoor, and that's just, we're at the same capacity that we were. We haven't extended our seating capacity. We've expanded our area because of the outdoor canopy, but it's the same seating number.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the clarifications on those items we heard. I'll just look at the board here if there are any other questions for the applicant to wrap this up before we go to executive session. Anything? Okay. Thank you. We'll now move into executive session here on the board.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Yes. Let me clarify a bit on the discussion we had as relating to imposing a condition of temporary use. I think the point that is significant in that regard is that if the application meets all of the conditions for approval, then the applicant is entitled to a full approval, and we don't have the ability to limit the duration of that approval. We can impose conditions if that condition makes it possible to meet a standard that would not otherwise have been met. But we can't impose a condition that limits the duration of the approval. That's been established by the code.
I have a question, if I could, because I did notice one of the other, I think the case involving Churchill property, it has it's linked to the width of Churchill Road. And there's a provision that if the width of Churchill Road should be reduced, then the variance would be null and void. And that's partially where I was having my question, where my question was coming from. So it seemed to me, having read that whether you call it temporary or that once a condition is passed, that the variances can be null and void, it seemed to be a possibility.
Staff I would assume that reducing the dimension of Churchill Road would then bring it out of compliance, and that would be the basis for. But perhaps John can comment on that as well.
Yeah. For the record, John Roach, Principal Planner for the city. Just with regards to that application that you're speaking to, the basis for that condition of approval is that if the right-of-way for Churchill Road is narrowed, and you'll hear this in staff's presentation, is that if the right-of-way is narrowed, the facts of the variance change. The front property line changes at that point and could potentially change. And we don't want it to be construed where that variance thereby moves as a result of these change of facts. So we don't want it to be where the front property line shifts further north, and therefore now the property owner has a right, based upon this previous variance, to move their house even further north, closer to the roadway. Because of those change of facts, we want to make sure that the variance does not follow with that. With regards to the temporary nature, and that was the basis for the outdoor program that was established, that was mentioned by Ms. Louie. And there were conditions that were associated with that. They were tied to a declaration of a state of emergency by the mayor. They were tied to limitations on hours. There was limitations on occupancy of the building. They could not exceed 50% of the occupancy of the structure at that point. That was all with the understanding that it was a temporary nature. It was applicable to all restaurants within the city. And we developed that program for that purpose. And then when the state of emergency expires and when those capacity limitations went away, so did that program. So that's kind of, what you're talking about were the exact nature of that temporary outdoor dining program that is no longer in place because those capacity limitations are no longer applicable from the city standpoint.
So my concern is we as a board are being put in this all or nothing position when it seems what the applicant did was to meet a temporary condition. And I recognize that the city's regulations have changed now, but that doesn't mean the population is just going to go right back and say, fine, the city's regulations have changed, now we can go back. I think a significant portion of the population is still going to be reticent about going inside. So I'm sympathetic to a business that needs to deal with that. And so, again, the issue seems to me that we're apparently, according to the city attorney, we're placed in this all or nothing. Either we grant it or deny it, that there's no sort of in between, because it seems to me that the reason this was built was to deal with the pandemic, which I think at some point in the future is not going to be what it was for the last year and a half. When that is, nobody knows, but given the history of pandemics, we will move beyond it at some point. And it seems like this canopy was built specifically to allow the business to continue to function and serve guests during the pandemic. Anyways, that's where it was, and I guess I just simply wonder whether there is any sort of solution that the city and the applicant could arrive at that deals with that, other than putting us in the position of it's all or nothing.
Is there a question? I'm sorry, just.
It's sort of a statement.
I'm happy to respond, but.
It's begging a question, okay? It's begging a solution, because again, it's just an observation.
I mean, from staff's perspective, we're looking at it from the worst case scenario. I mean, this, as it was indicated, there's no temporary nature to this. Once the variance is granted, this awning could continue indefinitely. There's no limitations on that, and we got to look at it from the structural standpoint and the potential impacts with regards to that. And there's nothing preventing, let's hoping that things get better and people get more comfortable with the circumstances and so forth. They're saying that they're limiting the capacity inside their restaurant. As far as I know, that is voluntarily. That limitation is not being imposed upon them by any executive order or state of emergency or anything like that. So, 6 months from now, we could completely be on this, let's hope. And, they're back to 100% occupancy and they feel like that they can put the tables back to where they were and so forth. Well, now in essence, they've increased their square footage or increased their amount of seating for the restaurant and thereby generating their own need for more parking. And, we all know that snowballs.
But isn't there anything you can do as a city to deal with that? The idea that this is a temporary situation, hopefully, and that they're dealing with their clientele in this manner, and perhaps in 6 months, as you suggest, it goes away, and they no longer need the canopy. There's no solution to that?
I just don't know what that limitation or that reevaluation would be tied to.
Well, forget about calling it a variance. Is there something like special use, temporary, whatever?
In the current zoning code, no, there is not a process to do that. Could the city, from a policy perspective, reevaluate the temporary outdoor dining program or what have you? Of course, but that would not be specific to this property and thereby not applicable to anybody else. That would be more of a policy program decision, whether we want to amend our code to allow these on a more permanent basis to everybody, or whether we want to find a way in which to continue this or reinstitute this temporary outdoor dining program. And that's a policy decision.
Okay, fair enough, I appreciate that.
And I would just add to that, Board, that the question of variance, in effect, is perpetual. It doesn't turn on conditions that may exist temporarily or at the moment. It'll apply next year, and the standards will be the same. So it really doesn't turn on social or economic or
And I
environmental
appreciate that, and I
conditions.
recognize that, and that's sort of where I was searching
Right.
for the split the baby, so to speak, okay? But I hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the board attorney for the clarification and instructions. So we'll, I think we've transitioned now into executive session. So we'll go ahead and discuss amongst ourselves. We'll start off with Vice Chair Kammerer, if you'd like to just
Sure.
continue on the thoughts.
Well, I think you asked an appropriate question earlier to the staff attorney about the differences between the variance, the earlier variance and the current one. Did it have to meet all the qualifications? The applicant have to meet all the qualifications for the prior variance, and that was regardless of whether it was a structure or a canopy. Based on that colloquy, to the extent they've already previously met the requirements for a variance, I would say then apparently they've met them for this as well. Doesn't seem to be much of a difference between 4 feet and 3 feet to me.
Now, we can't base this variance on having met a prior variance. This one has to turn on its own facts. We don't have those facts before, so you'd have to evaluate this on the evidence and testimony presented here today and determine if it meets the standards, that evidence, not previous evidence.
I do want to jump in then, I guess, because I was of kind of a similar line of thinking as Vice Chair Kammerer, and I realize that this is viewed based upon the application and the facts that are presented to us. But in looking at the backup, this board, which didn't include any of us as members at the time, was presented with an application to extend the building into the rear setback it looks like, I think that was in the year 2000. And the findings of fact of this board were that, that allowing that encroachment into the setback, just reading from that, it says, will not convey a special benefit not afforded to other property owners within the same zoning district, and it was the minimum variance necessary to allow reasonable use of the property. So that sort of colored my thinking in saying, okay, well, they're asking, this is the same property, the same application, asking for basically the same thing. So it seemed consistent that we would say, well, if upon reviewing a setback encroachment of this order of magnitude and in this location, this board determined based on findings of fact that it did not convey a special benefit and did not, and that it was the minimum variance necessary. It seemed inconsistent or hard for this board to say, well, now it does convey a special benefit, that same setback encroachment does convey a special benefit and isn't the minimum necessary. I think that's one of the things I was looking at where it seemed it would be inconsistent if the board found two different things for an application on the same property for the, basically on the same setback line on the same side of the property.
I'd point out, Mr. Chair, that I don't know that you can conclude that that's the case unless the testimony, facts, and evidence from that hearing were presented here today so that you could make that determination. Your decision on this application has to be based on what's presented today at this hearing, and it can't be influenced by our opinions of what might have happened in a prior application. It's got to be based on the testimony presented here today under oath.
Understood, and I realize that the only part of the backup we have is that this board made that finding previously, but would the fact that this board made that finding previously constitute at least one data point in our decision today?
It could if you had the facts that it made it on. You don't have those, is really the point, say.
Okay,
Right.
okay. Sorry to jump in there.
No, I think that was good. Well, look, I think, I forget your name, sir, please.
John Schmidt.
John Schmidt?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I think Mr. Schmidt's Exhibit A addresses the conditions, and he seems to have addressed those. I understand the staff attorney has given her responses to each of those. I think the evidence they presented supports the 10 different items necessary for a variance in this case.
Okay, is that,
Is that a motion? Is that a
That was my
motion?
come for our executive session.
okay, yeah, concludes your commentary.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Go to Board Member Fields.
I too have some great reservations about this particular case and trying to square the environment dealing with the pandemic and trying to stay in business and I'm at a quandary as well with the fact that there's no solutions in between either permanent allowance or just outright denial. I would ask that the parties go back and see if there's any way possible before we make a final determination. Is there any other solutions that can be had? Because as we're discussing prior cases, we could be in the midst of setting a precedence as well for this board. And I would be hesitant to do that without exploring every possible situation to resolve this without doing so. Thank you.
We go to Board Member Wood.
Two comments. One, I believe I heard a contradiction in the parking where staff's report indicates there was no change in the parking and the applicant's report shows a loss of a space of parking. So I didn't know if we needed that clarified. However, I think that a great deal of discussion has been given on this being done more or less on a temporary basis because of COVID. And let's say they did it because they did want to increase their capacity. I think that the conditions that staff has put in the approval of this application require them to get a permit. That permit would deal with capacities and parking and any of the issues that have sort of come up during this process. So those conditions would satisfy me.
Okay, thank you. I'll first start off by saying it is difficult as a board to come up here in a situation where this is after the fact and we're being asked for forgiveness rather than permission. But I understand that's where we are, and also that it is compelling. I think that the applicant spoke to the need to to respond quickly, to be able to maintain. To stay in business and maintain service to its customers during the time where we are, as we all know, living in very unprecedented times. It has required a lot of things that nobody 2 years ago would have ever dreamt of occurring. And so I do understand that case. I certainly don't want us to be in a situation as a board to be hearing many cases like this where we're dealing with something after the fact. But again, that's where we are on this, and that's understood. I think in my line of work, I would just mention that I think we've have seen as I've seen site plans for restaurants coming in now where restaurants are, the ratio of outdoor seating to indoor seating is vastly different than what they would have had in the past. And these restaurants aren't making temporary decisions. They're deciding to permanently build their buildings this way. And I think it's recognizing that even if the pandemic, quote unquote, ends at some point in the near future, I think to your point, Mr. Kammerer, the people have developed a reluctance, to just thinking twice about eating inside. And so even if the pandemic is, again, quote unquote, over, and I don't know when we ever figure that out, when it really truly ends, there still will be, I think, a built-in. It appears that there is going to be I think a built-in preference among a certain significant percentage of the population to eating outdoors, just to maintain safety. And unfortunately, when COVID started, when we first started hearing about it, and it was kind of far away, I wasn't all that concerned because through my lifetime, I feel like we've heard about H1N1, avian flu, and it seemed like those were distant, and they seemed bad where they happened, but they never truly reached us. And it wasn't until COVID reached us that we realized this. And even if COVID were to end, I think reliably, and we've seen every few years a new strain of some sort of disease that's popped up. And luckily, again, thankfully, in our sake, we hadn't been very heavily affected by those in the past, but now who knows if the next H1N1 comes out in 5 years, if that would spread to us as well too. So even if it's not COVID, there could be another pandemic that falls on the heels here. So, speaking to the temporary nature, I don't know that we'll see the end of this, or that that people will truly feel like they can never go back because of the thought that either a new strain of COVID could develop or something else could happen. I think the other point was you brought up the Churchill Road example, and I think in that case that's very distinctly measurable. Where if the right of way were to change, then that's a measurement. That's something that we know and we can measure. There's no way that we'll be able to say, on May 15th, 2022, COVID is over. There's never going to be any measuring point. So I think that makes it almost impossible, just, and notwithstanding the other reasons that were given by the board attorney, why we can't probably tie this to some sort of temporary measure, because I don't think there's a measurement that we can that I can readily think of that we could tie this to. My thoughts on this are, I feel that the applicant has demonstrated in their material how they comply with the 10 criteria that we were required to judge this on. I think that in looking at what's been presented to us, that those criteria have been met, and I understand the position staff's in, and that probably if this, that they did work in not probably, that they definitely did work in good faith to try to find another solution. But I understand some of the drawbacks from an operational standpoint from the restaurant if that alternate solution were to be implemented. So I think that we are dealt with the situation here where it's a tough situation, but that's what we're here to decide, and I think that those criteria have been met. I know the applicant came forward. You had asked for I think maybe a little bit of a reading or consideration if you wanted us to proceed on a vote or possibly continue it. So
if that's a possibility. And there was additional testimony by Mr. Roach in terms of the parking, and a concern by Mr. Wood and Fields about the parking. So if I can address that. With the expansion of that outdoor, we still meet parking right now. So we were over parked by a few spaces before, but with the additional 600 square feet, we have the parking to take our current capacity as well as the outside capacity. So I want to make that clear that we do meet it in this after effect, for lack of a better term. And if we could get a straw poll, that would be great with the limitation of members that you have here today.
Okay. We haven't really, it's a little bit of a straying from our normal procedure, but, I think without, taking the motion, the applicant wants to make a decision on whether they would ask to be continued or for us to go ahead and vote. Again, I've indicated that I would be in support just based on the testimony that's been provided to us and the material in our backup, but I don't know if.
No, well, obviously, it's an important decision for the applicant because there's only 4 board members here today, and you'd have to win every one of them supported.
Okay. Mr. Wood, if you wanted to provide any feedback to the applicant and as to your support or not of a motion to proceed.
I'm comfortable with the conditions that the city has placed in the requirement in order to grant it, and I'm prepared to make a motion to grant the variance.
Okay. Before we do that, I'll ask just Mr. Fields that the applicant was asking for just some direction before.
I'm still a little bit uneasy without having some assurance that they've exhausted all avenues to try to resolve this with staff before we move forward.
Okay. I'll allow the applicant, if you'd like to discuss with your and for staff, I just had a quick question. What was, I think they did receive a code enforcement violation, so normally they're given a period of time to resolve that. What was the time frame?
Yes, I believe that was December 14th of this year that they have to resolve the canopy issue.
Okay. So if this were to be continued, I would think this would probably need to go on to the next month's meeting in order to give them time to finish getting through the building permit process. And again, I think they're discussing that. Do you know, is there any process or mechanism for if there's a code violation for that to be extended if they need the additional time?
I believe that the special magistrate order is final, so they have until December to resolve this issue.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, you guys have been very gracious today, so I appreciate it. Commissioner Fields, I'm looking for what assurances you're looking for, from between us and staff. And I say that because obviously, we've come clean that this was built without a permit against there. So any solution that is between us, I think, is a relocation of it. That's the essence of the variance request, a setback reduction. So, we built it unfortunately without a permit. I hope that you felt that, that we meet the 10 criteria. This certainly wasn't something that they expected. But I don't know what additional assurances, staff's been out probably 3 times. Their solutions are to relocate it, and we understand that. But it's built, so any other solution is, moving it. Is there any feedback you can give me what you're looking for us to work with staff other than that?
As far as you're in the process of getting all of the permitting, and you're pretty sure that.
Yes, absolutely. We've talked to our contractor, our structural contractor. They have addressed all the comments. This is the last pending comment because they can't issue the permit because it doesn't meet the setback. If you were to grant it, it would meet the setback and the permit would be granted, and it would also close out our code enforcement violation. And so the magistrate gave us 6 months to get an application together, come before you, and either pull it or not, for lack of a better term.
Can we hear from staff once again on this? And if staff is...
With regards to the permit status, it looks like building has not yet passed off on their review in addition to zoning. So what their outstanding issues are, I cannot tell you, but apparently they have not passed off on that building permit review yet.
And do you feel that staff has exhausted all of its efforts to try to accommodate the property owner at this point to help them get through this issue?
I mean, staff looked at it from all different perspectives. We did not have a conversation with the applicant. They have not come to us with regards to other alternatives. It's an exercise that staff has completed in analyzing the variance request, and staff firmly believes that there are alternatives to meeting the setback requirements and addressing the concerns of the applicant with the need to provide outdoor seating. So whether it's, as I had mentioned in my staff presentation, whether it be a bigger canopy, a smaller canopy, reconfigured and shaped differently, that could have been addressed had the applicant come in with building permits.
Okay. So do you think if we were to stay this to the next meeting that you could get with the applicant to see if there's any other alternatives that can help resolve this issue?
For the record, John Roach, Principal Planner, and the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from the applicant and what I'm hearing from the board is that you're looking for us to go back and find an amenable solution. We feel like that the existing canopy and the existing setback, which was built without a permit, does not comply with all of the standards. That's not to say that an alternative version that either meets code or potentially, we feel like, based upon reevaluation, would comply with the standards. But it's my understanding from the applicant that their position is that it is either the existing canopy as proposed or no canopy at all. I don't think they have the interest, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, of putting up an alternative solution that would require removal and or relocation of the existing one.
Thank you.
So I think they're asking you to evaluate it based upon its current configuration, despite the fact that staff is more than willing to work with the applicant on an alternative. It's just whether they're willing to pursue that alternative, that's up to them.
Mr. Roaster is right. It's a built structure. So we're happy to work with staff, but we're going to end up with not needing the variance because it's going to be a relocation. They don't support the standards that COVID was the cause of this, and so we would be back in here whether the variance went from 3 feet to 4 feet to 10 feet. It's either, I think in their mind, what I'm hearing is it either makes code or it doesn't, and that's their solution they put forward. We don't feel that solution works. It actually reduces a parking place. It has people going through our outdoor dining area, and we hope you would consider that. And thank you again for the straw poll. But if it's something you don't feel that you can support, then I would ask for a deferral for a month.
So I think from the applicant's perspective, again, giving them just some feedback, the question is probably just to Board Member Fields, if you feel that the additional information that you've heard allows you to feel supportive of this when we go to a vote or not.
I think we probably want to hold it over.
Okay, so I'll ask for a motion. Would you like to make a motion, Member Fields?
I would move that we table this item to the next meeting.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, we'll ask to call the roll, please.
Christopher Camera.
Yes, aye.
Christopher Hagan,
Yes.
Michael Wood,
Yeah,
Alfred Fields.
you wanna,
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
yeah, Mr. Chair, now, you should give them directions as to what you would like to come back to you at your next meetings.
So the direction, if I, and I'll ask any board members to jump in, that I believe we heard is for you to have an additional dialogue meeting with staff to determine if an alternate canopy configuration can be settled upon, or I guess, or alternatively, if you can convince staff that the criteria have been met.
Yes, sir, I
Okay.
understand. Thank you, Chair, and board members. I know it was difficult,
Yeah.
so thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you, sounds like probably in the November meeting.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
May I just ask, you should think of everything possible
Yes, sir.
that might reach a solution, is what I would suggest. Not just limited to, can the canopy be here or there? Think every possible solution.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Good.
I appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, we'll move on the agenda to item number 2, which is Zoning Board of Appeals, case number 3393. I'll ask, first of all, for the secretary to read this into the record.
A request by Joan Garrick Murray of West Palm Beach Professional Center, LLC, on behalf of Chris Garusi for a variance from Section 94-408E2 of the city's zoning and land development regulations to permit a 25-foot-high monument sign along 45th Street where 10 feet is the maximum height allowed for a monument sign in the industrial light zoning district. The approximately 5.01 acre property is located at 5601 Corporate Way within Commission District Number 1, Commissioner Kelly Schoaf.
I've been advised, and I'll turn over to Mr. Roach, that I don't know if is the applicant here today?
Mr. Chair, for the record, John Roach, Principal Planner. No, the applicant has not appeared yet for the hearing today. It's my understanding, and the planner in charge of the project, Rafaela, can speak to this if you're looking for a little bit more detail, but it's my understanding that we've tried to reach out to them on multiple occasions throughout the last week and have not gotten a response with regards to that. And again, they are not here today. So I believe there's a couple options that we can do with regards to this, and the city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong. The first is that the code does provide provision within the public hearing section that failure to appear to the hearing by the applicant can be grounds for the board to deny the request. So that is an option. Staff could continue with their presentation. You could make a decision based upon that. You could continue the item. I will put on the record that this item was pulled from the agenda, I believe, 2 months ago, when we tried to have a dialogue with the applicant with regards to our recommendation of denial and so forth. So we pulled it from the agenda to have that conversation. We put it back on with the understanding that, they were asking us to move forward despite the recommendation. And that's the reason it's on your agenda today. So staff is recommending approval. We're happy to give that presentation as to why. But there is grounds.
Approval, or were you recommending denial?
I'm sorry?
Did you say you recommended approval?
Denial of this application, yes. But there is a provision within the city's Code of Ordinances and the zoning and land development regulations that just purely not attending the hearing can be used for grounds for denial.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roach. I think with the applicant not being here today, I think we could maybe offer a brief discussion up here, whether we want to, just go ahead. Since it looks like we will be meeting in November, whether we just continue this to the November meeting, give the applicant a chance to proceed, or whether we want to either hear the case today or go ahead and deny it. So I'm open for any discussion from any of the members here up on the dais.
Seeing that we've discontinue it to this meeting, and we're gonna meet anyway next month. I recommend that we finalize it next month.
So you're suggesting to continue on to next month?
Yes.
Any other feedback from any of the members up here before we maybe open up for a motion?
It seems appropriate, what Mr. Field suggested.
Okay. And Board Attorney, if that's the case, then we don't need to go any further with the staff presentation or anything. We could just go ahead and vote if that's the motion?
That is correct.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion then.
Second.
Well,
So moved.
okay. It's been moved by Member Fields to continue case number 3393 to the November Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Vice Chair Kammerer. I'll ask the Secretary to call the roll, please.
Jonathan Burgess,
I agree with the motion.
Christopher Kammerer,
Yes.
Christopher Hagan,
Yes.
Michael Wood,
Yes.
Alfred Fields.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 5-0. That moves us on to item 3, Zoning Board of Appeals, case number 3398. I'll ask the Board Secretary to read that into the record, please.
A request by Kevin McGinley of Land Research Management Incorporated on behalf of Frederick R. Van der Griff for a variance from Section 94-72A2A of the city's land development regulations, specifically regarding the required front yard setback for construction of a new single-family residence. The approximately 0.19 acre site is located at 228 Churchill Road within Commission District Number 5, Commissioner Christina Lambert.
Thank you. We'll first start off with hearing from the applicant. Please state you may remove your mask while at the podium. Just start off by please stating your name and address for the record.
Thank you very much. Kevin McGinley, President of Land Research Management, which is located at 2240 Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard in West Palm Beach, and has been a consulting firm that I've been running for 40 some odd years now. One of the things I learned from doing planning and zoning work sometimes is if you have a staff report with a glowing recommendation and no opposition, you're better off just sitting down and being quiet. So I will forego a PowerPoint or elaboration of this and just get to the important aspects of this request. And that is that the subject property is located within a plat that was recorded back in the 1920s. So for 100 years now, this plat has had a future, what they called a lake pathway that would go from Olive Avenue down to Flagler Drive with no plans by the city or anybody else to do anything with that property. It is like a 63-foot wide right-of-way, whereas your typical ones in local streets are at 50. So this no man's land of approximately 24 feet from the edge of curb to our property line has been out there for nearly 100 years. By doing work like this, I look at a situation and say, first thing you do is look at it, abandon it. The city does not have any plans for it. It's been out there for 100 years. Let's have property owners reclaim it. So that was our first approach to this. But in speaking with your staff, and particularly the engineering department, they enlightened me that they didn't really want to see a piecemeal abandonment of all of these lots that are on Churchill Road. And they had no interest in doing a sweeping abandonment of it. So they requested, look, leave it there, look for a variance setback. We discussed that with planning staff and they concurred. So in a way, we still have, we're still meeting the setback and far exceeding that from the edge of curb for Churchill Road to our garage. The garage is the subject of this variance request. The house itself meets the 25-foot setback from our property line and doesn't need the extra 24 feet that we will be maintaining, cutting the lawn like anybody else does in front of their property when it's a public right-of-way. We've gone through our 10 standards, and I think we've met all 10 of them, and staff concurs, so I won't, I won't go further into the analysis. There are some other aspects to it. The last one being that many of the homes down by Flagler Drive on the south side of Churchill have already recouped that right-of-way. They're in a different plat, but they've got it so that they have that extra right-of-way so that their setbacks were established a long time ago. We're not in that position. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McGinley. We'll start off with questions from the board members. I'll start again with Board Member Fields.
No questions.
Okay. Board Member Wood.
No questions.
Go to Vice Chair Cameron.
Yes, hi. If you could we put up the picture just so we can be clear when you refer to the right-of-way? I think in the application, it's the location aerial.
You would like to see an aerial?
Yeah, that's in the,
Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
right. So the right-of-way is the area between the red and the street, right? Churchill Road, and it's stretched.
I'm sorry, give me
Okay.
1 second. That's
It's-
a better graphic.
Well, if you wanted to see the aerial, which we were just talking about, it's the area, the right-of-way is between the two green lines.
Yeah, well, actually, if you could put the aerial, it's just easier for me to picture.
The aerial again?
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Right there. Okay, sorry, go ahead. The right-of-way is between the two green lines on either side of Churchill Road, correct?
Right.
Okay.
That is the 66-foot or so right-of-way, and that starts the red line being our property line, where the right-of-way ends and our property line begins.
So the proposal basically is that if the right-of-way is abandoned, meaning the areas between the green lines, and it just narrows down to the street itself?
Right, the abandonment would be for, basically that's 24 feet of green area that you'll see just north of the red line. That runs 3/4 of the way or so down Churchill to Flagler. And the abandonment that I referred to would mean that each parcel would come in with a separate abandonment application. And that just didn't seem practical to staff. Just come in, leave the right away where it is, but get variance relief because we're still going to exceed the 25 feet from our garage to the property line, to the back of curb, the right-of-way line.
Right. I think the condition imposed is simply if the city agrees to the abandonment of the right-of-way, which means then your property would go right to the edge of the road. Is that correct?
Right. If for some reason the property gets abandoned, neighbors get together, they decide for some reason they want to do it in the future, then that becomes our land, and therefore the variance is not necessary because it'd be our property.
Okay. That's what I just wanted to picture it on the
Yes, sir.
aerial, though. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Okay. Member Burgess.
Yeah, my question is also about this condition of the variance being abandoned if the right-of-way is abandoned in the future. That condition seems like it could be making an assumption that if the right-of-way was ever abandoned, it's the 13 feet closest to this side of the property that would be abandoned, and instead of being split down the center line of the road, or potentially only a partial right-of-way abandonment where it's they need to fit in additional sidewalk space or something, and so they only go down to 60 or 55 feet instead of a 50-foot cross-section. So I'm just wondering from an applicant's perspective, because we haven't heard from staff yet, are you okay with just the blanket condition as it's stated in the staff report, saying that if this variance is approved with that condition, the variance could be essentially taken away if any form of right-of-way abandonment was to take place in the future?
Well, it's not necessarily taken away, and I'll let staff speak for themselves. It just becomes a moot point, because if it's been abandoned then it would be added to our platted lot. We would increase the size of our lot by whatever is abandoned. Right now, it's a 24-foot. If they wanted to put sidewalks in, trouble is it would be a sidewalk that wouldn't quite get to Flagler Drive because, as I mentioned, as you go further down Churchill, those homes have already acquired from their plat that right-of-way, so there's not enough room for a sidewalk, and we don't feel that that's going to be a problem. So, you know, our house will be built, and if somewhere down the line they would want some of that right-of-way, give it to us and keep, you know, a few feet for themselves, 5 feet, 6 feet for a curb, and they give us a partial, that would be okay.
Yeah, and I guess
24.
my question there is if they only do a partial abandonment in the future, and then all of a sudden that variance goes away, it says all the existing buildings inside of, well, let me just see exactly where how the condition reads. If at any time the access right-of-way on Churchill Road is abandoned, the variance shall become null and void. So in a partial right-of-way abandonment condition, if your setback may go down to 17 feet instead of the full 25 feet, if they're not abandoning a full 13 feet. And I'm just wondering if the condition itself needs to be addressed so that it addresses that situation in the future.
That's a very good point, too. Maybe it just needs to have, it can be abandoned because it's no longer necessary, but the structure once she gets building permits from the city, will be deemed a valid conforming structure. I think that's a good clause to add to that condition of approval, because it clarifies if there's a partial, we still meet our setback. So I would ask staff to entertain that during their presentation. Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Burgess?
No other questions.
Applicant? Okay, I have no questions. Okay. We'll go to the staff presentation, please.
Hi, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Elena Wooten, planner representing staff in the Zoning Board of Appeals case 3398. I think the applicant did a great job on his presentation, but I'm just going to go over some points. As stated, the applicant is asking for a variance for 12 feet for the front setback, or 25 feet is required. This is a dimension illustration of the roadway. Maybe it can illuminate a little bit more about the dimensions of the typical roadway and then the section of Churchill Road that we are looking at today. In this illustration, you can see that it's the top part is the typical roadway. The orange dashed lines represent the width of the roadway or the right-of-way. You can see at the top portion, the top picture is the right-of-way is 50 feet wide, which is typically a single-family lot, only has 5 to 10 feet between the edge of the road and the front property line. You can see the bottom illustration depicts the section of Churchill Road in front of the subject property where the right-of-way is 63 feet wide, including the 24-foot area in between the edge of the road and the front property line. The front property lines are labeled by the red arrow, and you can see even with the 12-foot setback, there's still a total of 36 feet between the edge of the road on Churchill and the new home, which is the garage portion that does not meet the required setback. You can see that there's even more of a setback with this configuration than with a regular typical lot where the 25-foot setback is met. Therefore, staff believes that there are peculiar circumstances to this property that are not applicable to other lots in the city. This is a survey of the subject property showing the right-of-way on Churchill. This is the proposed site plan, and you can see the 24-foot area depicted here, as well as the 36-foot or 36 feet in between the back of the curb and where the garage begins. This is a site photo of the property. It's now vacant. This is my site video. I don't know why it's turned like this. I'm sorry. Here it is. You can see it's a vacant lot. The surrounding areas are residential single-family homes. It's just a panoramic view of the area. So it's staff's professional opinion that the requested variance does satisfy all of the variance standards found within section 9438D6 of the city zoning and land development regulations. Staff recommends approval of this variance request with the condition, which I apologize is not on the slide. I will read it now. It's also in your backups. Staff recommends approval with the condition of at any time the excess right-of-way on Churchill Road is abandoned, this variance shall become null and void, and the required front setbacks as required by the city's zoning and land development regulations shall be reinstated. Any structures existing at the time of the abandonment that do not conform to the required setbacks shall be deemed non-conforming and subject to the regulations in Article 14 of the city's zoning and land development regulations. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wooden. I'll start off with Board Member Wood. Any questions for staff?
No questions.
Okay. Vice Chair Kammerer?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Board Member Burgess?
Yes, again, just on this condition to clarify, in the event that the full 13 feet is not abandoned in the future, would staff support amending this condition to read something like, if at any time the excess 13 feet right away on Churchill Road is abandoned, the variance shall become null and void? Because in the instance that less than that 13-foot dimension is abandoned, and the applicant with an existing structure at that point would then have to come in, or in theory, and ask for a variance for 8 feet or whatever the leftover dimension is. So I'm just wondering if a modified language there may prevent that instance in the future.
For the record, John Roach, Principal Planner, I understand the concern. I'll kind of pose it with an alternative concern. First is, to clarify the way the condition is worded, it is our opinion that if the excess area is abandoned, that the existing house that's proposed today would continue. We're not asking them to come back for another variance for that existing structure. It would just continue as a non-conforming, if for some reason that garage was not 25 feet from the future, the front property line after the abandonment, it's just considered a nonconformity. It can continue the way that it is. If they were to want to expand the house at that point into that 25 feet, then yes, they would have to come back to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The concern that I have with putting the 13-foot limitation on there, as opposed to something in relation to the curb line or so forth, is that, let's say we abandon 12 feet. Well, the variance is still void, the way you're proposing, or the variance is still good based upon the way you're proposing to word it. At that point, the variance still being good, then the garage could even move 12 feet further north, or any other addition to the house, because that variance is active and would be applicable. And again, the concern of is if the facts are changing by the abandonment, no matter how far north it moves, the property line on Churchill, that shifts where the building could be placed because the variance would still be applicable. So how to do it, the way we proposed it, I feel is the best way at this point, in which it would allow the applicant to move forward with what is proposed at this time. And then if it's abandoned and they choose to expand the structure at any point, they could come back before the ZBA for that expansion. But we would consider the existing structure as it's built and proposed before you as a grandfathered nonconformity.
Thank you. No other questions.
Okay, Board Member Field
No questions.
and Board Member Wood?
No questions.
Okay. Going along those lines, I'll put Mr. Roach back up on the spot. Just going along the lines of what Member Burgess was mentioning, would it be, and maybe this is getting too complicated, but would it be possible to instead word it in a way, I understand the intent, and I think that makes sense, to say something along the lines of, if at any time any right-of-way width on Churchill Road is reduced, the amount of the variance will be reduced by the same distance of that as that reduction up to 13 feet, at which time the variance would be null and void. So if the right-of-way width were reduced by 7 feet, then the amount of the variance would be reduced by 7 feet. If it were reduced by 10 feet, it would be reduced by 10 feet up to 13 feet.
Yeah, that's along the lines of what I was thinking.
I don't know if that's well worded or not. I'm sure there's a wordsmith who could word that better, but something along those lines.
From staff's perspective, I'm fine with that. I feel like it would.
Okay.
I mean, the main thing is that we want to make sure that the placement of the house, visually speaking, in relation to the roadway and so forth, is consistent, no matter where that front property line is. You know, if the right-of-way is abandoned entirely and it's 13 feet, we want to make sure the house is 25 feet back from that, which it is proposed, before you. It's that excess right-of-way that's causing the issue. So, if half of that 13 feet is abandoned and the variance is reduced accordingly, I think from staff's perspective, that would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, so I think when we get to the point of making a motion, maybe we can do something along those lines. The applicants back up, I guess we're going to go to public comment, but if you want to weigh in on whether you are okay with that or not.
We are. Just when I heard the non-conforming word, we never like to hear that, because if the garage would be damaged and we come in for some repair and they say, oh no, it's a non-conforming. So I think the proportionality you were talking about, to keep it at the 25 feet is the way to go, because then it becomes a conforming structure. We can't expand it. We can't go out another 5 feet and build that without coming back for another variance. But the setback that we're asking for and the variance we're asking for now, it'd be better if it doesn't render it a non-conforming portion of the house, just for repair purposes and all. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a good clarification. If there are no other questions for staff, we'll move to the public hearing. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Did we receive any emails or voicemails regarding this application?
No comments.
Okay. Is there anyone here in the chambers from the public who wishes to speak related to this application? Seeing none, then I'll close the public hearing. We'll move to executive session then. We'll start off with Vice Chair Kammerer.
No, I think you raised a good issue.
Okay, yeah.
Properly.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll maybe figure how to, it sounds like there's general agreement if we work on a way to word that. So we'll go to Member Burgess. Any comments for executive session? No. Okay. Board Member Fields?
I'm in agreement with the recommended changes by the board member.
Okay. And Board Member Wood?
I don't have any further comments. I'm good with it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have any further comments either, so I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve staff's recommendation with the condition as amended by
Okay.
the board to address the future reduction of the variance corresponding to the potential abandonment of the right-of-way so that the variance is still instated to the reduced dimension.
Okay. And there's some additional language on, if you go to page 93 of the packet that we'd recommend to be included in the motion. So if you're good with that, if you could go ahead and if you're in making a motion to grant the variance, then if you don't mind reading the language at the top for granting the variance.
I move that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant ZBA case number 3398, a request by Kevin McGinley of Land Research Management, Inc., on behalf of Frederick R. Vandergrift for a variance from Section 94-72A 2A of the Land Development Regulations for construction of a new single-family residence with a two-car garage with a 12-foot front setback, where code requires a setback of 25 feet for a residential lot. The motion is based upon the testimony presented along with the application submitted and staff report, which constitute competent substantial evidence. The board hereby makes findings of fact that each of the criteria in Article 2, Section 94-38D6 of the City of West Palm Beach Zoning and Land Development Regulations have been met. In addition, the granting of the variance is made conditional upon the following restrictions, stipulations, and/or safeguards that I move are necessary to ensure compliance with the proposed and intent of the zoning and land development regulations and consistent with the comprehensive plan of the City of West Palm Beach. And the condition, going back to the condition. I lost where the language of the condition is.
This is where having the paper does help, because you can
Thank you.
bookmark it more easily.
Right. If at any time the excess right-of-way on Churchill Road is abandoned, this variance shall become
Shall be reduced. I think.
reduced accordingly, and the required front setbacks as required by the city's zoning and land development regulations shall be reinstated. Any structures existing at the time of the abandonment that do not conform to the required setback shall be deemed non-conforming and subject to the regulations in Article 14 of the city's zoning and land development regulations.
And if I may, just ask for clarification, I think, because we'll have to define how it's reduced, that we would reduce it by amount equal to the reduction of right-of-way width up to 13 feet. If that makes sense. So if the right-of-way is reduced by 7 feet, the variance would be reduced by 7 feet.
Correct.
Yeah. So we'll state that as the reduction. It would be reduced by an amount equal to the reduction in right-of-way width up to 13 feet. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
again, the only issue is the nonconformity word in there. So if it's proportionately deemed at 25 feet at the time of the abandonment, we would respectfully request that it be deemed conforming because of the variance we're receiving today, not non-conforming, so we can't come in with repairs, hurricane damage, whatever it might do. We're back in a circle of approvals. So that was our intent. So if that could be modified to take out the word non-conforming and have it conforming. But at the time of abandonment.
Chairperson?
Well, and I definitely understand the concern about non-conforming. I think it says any structures existing at the time of abandonment that do not conform to the required setbacks, because we're saying we would adjust the setback so that it would remain consistent. So the way that that north wall of the garage is basically right at the setback the revised setback line today, that'll remain constant. So unless they built something that's in the setback illegally, I don't think that changes with this, because that line's going to remain constant with the language that's been proposed. I'll ask staff to verify.
For the record, John Roach, yeah, I think the way you're wording it, because the variance would not be null and void, it would still be applicable, it would just be reduced. Therefore, the structure that is in place at that time is still conforming because there's a variance for it. The concern would be is that if, like you're saying, if something was constructed in the setback, then that becomes a bigger issue. But, you know, if a variance is applicable and valid for that building, and so long as the variance shifts with that property line, then it would be a conforming structure in accordance with the variance.
Yeah, and I think then that leads to the question that whether we need this sentence at all, just because it basically seems like it's saying if there's anything, you know, that's inside that setback line, then it's going to be non-conforming. But that means they built something illegally, and we've got other code language that already addresses that.
And on the flip side, I mean, you know, the concern about reconstruction, our code deals with, you know, damages by a hurricane, winds, you know, things like that you could rebuild them within 12 months and so forth. So even if you didn't have a variance for it. So it could go either way, you know.
Okay. I'll go back to the maker of the motion if you want to adjust that, or.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that for clarity of the record, if we could restate that motion, it would be beneficial.
Thank you. That's going to be my request.
Thank you. All the way back to motion to approve the variance, to grant the variance, or just the condition part?
I would suggest that we restate in its entirety the motion. So.
Okay.
Chairperson, I would ask that we call for a new motion. That motion died for lack of a second for clarity of record and recording. So call for a new motion.
Okay, and I think the maker of the motion will be doing that then. So he'll be restating the motion with the condition for clarity.
Thank you. I move that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant ZBA's case number 3398, a request by Kevin McGinley of Land Research Management, Inc. on behalf of Frederick R. Vandergrift for a variance from Section 94-72A2A of the Land Development Regulations for construction of a new single-family residence with a two-car garage with a 12-foot front setback, where code requires a setback of 25 feet for a residential lot. The motion is based on the testimony presented along with the application submitted in staff report, which constitute competent substantial evidence. The board hereby makes findings of fact that each of the criteria in Article 2, Section 94-38D6 of the City of West Palm Beach Zoning and Land Development Regulations have been met. In addition, the granting of the variance is made conditional upon the following restrictions, stipulations, and/or safeguards that I move are necessary to ensure compliance with the purpose and intent of the zoning and land development regulations and consistent with the comprehensive plan of the City of West Palm Beach. The condition being, if at any time the excess right-of-way on Churchill Road is abandoned, the variance shall be reduced by a corresponding amount, and the required front setbacks, as required by the city's zoning and land development regulations, shall be reinstated.
Okay, the motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second motion.
Okay. We'll ask the board secretary to please call the roll.
Alfred Fields.
Yes.
Michael Wood.
Yes.
Christopher Hagan.
Yes.
Christopher Kammerer.
Yes.
Jonathan Burgess.
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes 5-0. Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. That's the end of the cases that were before us today. Move on to administrative appeals. I believe, based on our records, there are none. So we move on to unfinished business, of which there's none. New business, none. And so last item is other business, and it's that time of the year. So we'll move into nomination and election of officers for the coming year. I don't know if, I'm trying to recall if we typically start off just taking nominations for chair and then vice chair. Okay, so we'll move for any nomination of a board chair for the upcoming year.
I'll
I move-
nominate.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Fields, you go ahead. I stepped on you.
I was going to move that we keep our officers the same for the upcoming year.
And may I suggest that we call each one and by name and position?
And you're saying to do them individually as opposed to
Yep.
kind of a slate? Okay.
Appoint as chair and name and so on.
I offered Fields' motion that we nominate Christopher Hagan as chairperson of the board.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, there's a motion and second for Christopher Hagan for me to be chair of the board. Ask the secretary to call the roll, please.
Jonathan Burgess,
Yes.
Christopher Camera,
Yes.
Christopher Hagan,
Yes.
Michael Wood,
Yes.
Alfred Fields.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. And I'll just say thank you very much. I appreciate the.
I guess that means you accept the nomination.
Yes. Yes, I'd be happy to do it. I appreciate the trust that you've all placed upon me. I'll take a motion now for the vice chair of the board for the upcoming year.
I offer Fields' motion that Christopher Kramer as vice president of the board.
Is there a second?
I second.
And is that Kramer or Camera?
Camera.
Okay.
Camera, thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll ask the board secretary to please call the roll.
Christopher Hagan,
Yes.
Christopher Camera,
Yes, thank you.
Michael Wood,
Yes.
Jonathan Burgess,
Yes.
Alfred Fields.
Yes.
Okay, well, that concludes our new business. And with that, our other business, with that, there's nothing else on our agenda. So we are adjourned at 4:02 p.m. on October 7th, 2021.